Alright everyone, welcome to another session of Coding with RV. In today's session, we are going to learn a lot about REST API in depth. Stay tuned everyone, and for people who are joining us for the first time, please do like and share, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for later updates. REST. So what is REST? REST, as the definition stands for, is a representational state transfer. It's not a framework nor a jar. It's just an architecture style used to design your web services. You will still need some framework like Spring or Jersey to define your REST endpoints. Okay, REST works over the existing HTTP protocol and it makes use of the HTTP methods. We can transfer data in any format, like you could use JSON, a text, or an XML. But still confused about different HTTP methods? What's GET, what's POST, PUT, and DELETE? So let's understand REST architecture with an example. Say you go to a restaurant to dine in. Will you walk right into the kitchen, grab some food, and start eating? Not unless you own the place, right? Okay, so we enter a restaurant. Then someone at the front desk greets us and gets us seated. Then a server walks in, takes the order, and places order in the kitchen. Now let's compare the restaurant with our REST flow or REST architecture. Let's call the restaurant, the food joint, as a REST endpoint that we're making a call to. And the front end person who is greeting us and getting us seated, let's call it a REST controller. So the REST controller's sole duty is to accept the HTTP requests that are coming from the client and then call appropriate service methods to prepare a response for us. Our server from this example is the service layer which communicates between the controller and the backend logic, all the backend methods, and then prepare the response to get it sent over to the client. Okay, now the kitchen. The chef working on the kitchen will have access to the whole ton of ingredients which he can use to prepare our food, which in this case, let's call our entities. Let's think of our store room with ingredients as a database which has the raw information. The data repo is responsible, the data repo or the chef, he's actually responsible for picking this raw information from the database, and he's preparing an entity in a particular format which could be presented to our client, and then this gets served back to our client. And that's us in this scenario, in this particular example. Now let's put everything together and check. You get a HTTP request from a client at the REST endpoint, and the controller picks the request, calls the appropriate service methods. They call the backend logic, process the raw information from the database, prepare the entity for response, and send it back to the client. That's the entire flow of how a REST endpoint should be working. Let's look at what the different CRUD operations on a database can be performed, and what are the appropriate HTTP methods that we are supposed to use for each case. So in order to create an entity, if you're trying to create an entity or a database entry, we use the post HTTP method. And if we have to retrieve some information, some list of entities, we'll be using the GET protocol, the GET HTTP method. And in order to update an entity, if you have to just update an entity, we'll be using the PUT HTTP method. And then again, like delete, like as you know, delete could be used to delete an entity from the database. I know there still must be some people who still have questions about why exactly do we need REST web services? What's the sole purpose? Like, I understand the flow, I understand everything, but still, why do we need it? All right, let's look at that in the next slide. So, a REST API. Imagine you're working for a company and they want to develop a web application for their project. You set up the database, you have the tables created, you write the complete business logic and the backend logic, everything as per the requirement, and then you're building the front end code for the client web application, and it's all ready and you're packaged and you're running the application in prod. Now let's say the company has grown further and they want to build an Android application for their website. So at this point, would it be a very good logic, like you start from the scratch, design a database, create your tables, build the backend logic, and design the front end for the Android application? Would that be an appropriate solution? Or wouldn't it be easier if we are to be using the backend from the previous application, keep everything the same, use the same backend logic, and then just expose them as REST API calls and consume them in our Android application? Wouldn't that be awesome? That would save us a lot of time, but at the same time, you're not maintaining two different business logics for two different applications. And imagine, like, if in future, like if the company says we want an Apple mobile app as well, like we need an iOS app, it would be as simple as it. Like, you have everything ready with the backend, you have REST API calls, you just have to create the front end for the mobile app and consume these REST services. So that's all the benefits, and that's all the design that REST API and the web services bring into picture. So that's the whole reason why we are working on these REST APIs, the REST endpoints, why companies are interested in developing and exposing these endpoints. So in a microservice architecture, when you have multiple applications which are dependent on a single backend logic or backend business logic, it makes it easier when you're developing them as a REST endpoint and exposing it throughout the organization. Well, that's about the theory part, guys. Keep watching while we start coding our endpoints, and we'll be developing all the four, like get, post, delete, and put endpoints today. So keep following on, and also please don't forget to click on the thumbs up button for us, and stay tuned, guys.